so I guess you can hear me. I am Amy Bischoff, director of the Hershey Story, and before we begin, I just wanted to cover a couple of quick housekeeping things. This is our final program for this season. We will be back in the fall. We will have 2 programs here at the Hershey Story, and the dates, there's a flyer on the front table, so if you want to grab one before you leave tonight. They are not yet listed on Eventbrite, so hang on to the flyer. When they go up there, they will be on the Hershey Stories calendar, our Facebook page, Derry Township's website is a good place to find that information as well. There's a community tab on their main menu, and all about diversity is listed on there. And also, we have a Facebook page for Hershey Area All Things Diversity. So it's listed in lots and lots of places for you to find. But then in 2020, beginning in January, I think it's January and March, but double check the flyer, we'll be having 2 sessions that will take place at the Hershey High School, because we recently partnered with the school district and the school board to talk about some diversity topics that are important to students, and we really want to get younger kids and younger adults involved in these sessions, and they can handle a lot more people than we can. So we're really happy to be working with them. So pay attention to that location change. That's all I have for right now. I did want to mention Sherry Christian will not be able to make it tonight, but trust me, you will not be disappointed with this panel. I am very excited. Our discussion is entitled Creating an Inclusive Community for Individuals with Autism Spectrum Disorder. And our panel has been tasked with talking about their experiences, both good and bad, that highlight examples of inclusivity, or lack thereof, for individuals with autism and their families, too. And suggestions for how we can all strive for better outcomes for people with autism will also be shared before the evening is out. So I'm going to begin by introducing Dr. Patrick and Dr. Geyer. Then they're each going to speak about their experiences, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions. And I know this group is wonderful for questions, so we're excited for you to all get involved. I would say when you ask a question, please wait for one of the microphones to come to you so that everybody can hear your question. So we'll get started. So we're going to begin with introducing Dr. Nancy Patrick. She is a licensed... Is this sounding okay to everybody? It sounds like that, okay. Dr. Nancy Patrick is a licensed psychologist, certified school psychologist, and special education teacher. She owns a private psychological practice that serves predominantly children, teens, and adults with autism and their families. And she also teaches graduate courses on autism spectrum disorder for teachers at Messiah College. She is the author of 3 books on autism and Asperger's syndrome, and she has presented at conferences at the state, national, and international level, and she is also the parent of a young adult with autism. Dr. Nate Geyer was diagnosed as a child with autism spectrum disorder. He currently has 10 years experience in public health research in the areas of cancer, obesity, HIV, epilepsy, public health workforce, and vitamin D ancestry. He has advanced knowledge of statistical, software, and analyses procedures, holds a Doctor of Public Health, a Master's in Epidemiology, and a Bachelor's in Biology with a concentration in ecology. He is an experienced scholar practitioner with a broad background in biostatistics, epidemiology, and geographical information systems. He has submitted abstracts to conferences and is in the process of publishing key manuscripts in the literature, especially in the areas of HIV, epidemiology, obesity, cancer, and epilepsy. And I feel like a huge underachiever right now. So we're going to begin with Dr. Patrick, who's going to speak with us about her area of expertise and experience.
Well, it's really great to be here tonight, and it's great to see such a crowd, particularly people who are interested in the topic of autism spectrum disorders. There were a lot of things I could talk about with 40 years experience in this field, and the hardest part for me was to narrow it down to a 10-minute talk on what I really felt were the most pressing issue today. What was the message that I wanted to send? What's the charge that I want to give on this topic? Because I have this opportunity, I don't want to waste it. So this is what I've decided to do, and I'm going to begin that with some statistics, Nathan. In 2018, the average life expectancy of a male in the U.S. was 78 years and 7 months. The average life expectancy for a female in the U.S. is 81 years, 2 months. So if you're beyond that, that's a great thing. That's a blessing. Of this time, the majority of people spend between 16 and 20% of their life in school. That means that they spend the other 80 to 84% of their life adulting. As a 38-year special educator and school psychologist, I know that teachers and parents work together in a Herculean way to educate children with ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. Amazing things have happened, and these young people launch, and they end up spending most of their time either unemployed or underemployed. Why do we educate children? Why do we even have schools? You have to really ask yourself, after 38 years of hard work by many, many people, why, if people are going home and sitting on the couch? Well, the question really is that there's a general consensus that school is to teach children adult skills, the skills that they need to find work, to support themselves, to make a comfortable living, and to pay taxes. Education also serves some other areas, some other functions. Things like gaining an appreciation of our history, our own history, and the culture and the history of others. A familiarity with the fundamental concepts and methods of the sciences. The ability to evaluate information critically. To write and speak coherently. And what turns out to be especially difficult in diverse societies, to articulate the ethical values that enjoy reasonable consensus in the community. So these are what schools are supposed to do. But I have a message for you that I'd like to relay this evening, and I'm going to do it through my favorite pedagogy, which is storytelling. So I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you about my friend Daniel. Daniel was diagnosed with autism when he was in preschool. He was a bright youngster who struggled significantly with anxiety, sensory struggles, and social challenges. He managed to get through his school with a fairly solid education and had a few positive experiences along the way. He attended a prestigious college where he participated in the honors program, majored in English, he loved theater, and he spent his free time acting in college plays. He struggled a lot with anxiety and some isolation, but with the support of a college counselor and faculty who genuinely liked him, he was able to succeed and complete a 4-year degree with a Bachelors of Art in English and a minor in journalism. Well, his social challenges and anxiety required that he connect with a job placement and coaching agency after college. He was excited about that. He knew he needed that, and that would be good. So Daniel was full of hope that surely with his college degree from a prestigious institution, along with his excellent skills in writing, would help him secure competitive employment that would lead to a place of his own, friends, hobbies, and adventures. Well, the agency, they placed him in a position on a trial basis at a very large psychiatric practice near his home. His entry-level position was to answer the phone and greet patients as they arrived to their appointments. You might think this would be a really good position for a recent college graduate, but not for Daniel. The position tapped into every one of his weaknesses. In college, he developed an excellent work ethic and grit. He could push through most difficult situations. But this situation got the best of him. Over the course of a couple months, Daniel's anxiety grew, and it grew. The stress began to impact his sleep, his ability to eat, and his interest in almost everything. This led to difficulty keeping his work clothes clean and ready, remembering to take a shower, and even getting his hair cut. So in less than 3 months, he was coming to work unkempt, a behavior that was definitely noticed by his colleagues, supervisor, and job coach. As a result of this behavior, Daniel was let go. This was 6 years ago, and he has not yet re-entered the workforce. There were minor, thoughtful adaptations that could have been put into place to help Daniel succeed. The job was not right. It tapped into every weakness he had. Anxiety about meeting people, wanting to please, wanting to be a good receptionist, answering questions, in a social way, answering the phone politely. He wanted to do it, but it tapped into every one of his difficulties. If he'd been in data entry, or in filing, or in PR, or in writing, if he'd been in almost every single other position, he would have succeeded. But for some reason, even in an agency, did not understand the nature of his disability and what he really needed in order to be successful, and it wasn't a lot. It wasn't rocket science, or maybe HIV research.
I'll get to it.
Okay, perfect. So I want to leave you with this. As a society, we must really make a place available for every adult who wishes to participate and who wishes to work. Work gives people purpose, it gives them meaning, it even gives them health, and it gives them resources. And 90% of all adults on the autism spectrum, even like Daniel, are either underemployed or unemployed. If you own a business, or if you're in a position where you can hire adults with ASD, please do so. You will find that with minor, thoughtful accommodations, you will have an employee or employees who are loyal, committed, hardworking, honest, ethical, which didn't even used to be on the top 10 job requirement skills. Now it's number 1, because we have such a problem with ethics in our society at large, but who are ethical and who can also bring a new perspective, a new way of thinking to your companies or to your businesses. They can actually improve the quality of what you do and make it better, ultimately making you more money. So there are an estimated 1.5 million children in this country diagnosed with autism right now. 1.5 million children. And of those children, at least close to half have average to above average intellect. I mean, the normal curve applies to this population as well. So it's time to act, and it's time to act now. We need everyone to participate. We need everyone to work.
Thank you very much. So I think Nate has proven that it is possible to have a very successful career when you've been diagnosed with autism.
Correct.
So we would really like, I think, to hear a little bit about your journey and how you came into, your position and the kinds of things that you have learned and the ways that you communicate with people about how it works best for you.
I work best through trial and error. That's the first thing I wanted to do. I learn through mistakes. Meaning that, for example, if things don't go well, I try something else. And apparently, it leads to a lot of patience issues with other people, which I can understand in Daniel's situation can be frustrating to other people, but that's the way the typical autistic works, through trial and error. That's what worked best for me. And my story was a very interesting story to be on the underemployed situation and dealing with college, dealing with graduate school and such. But one thing was clear: in academia, there is a place for people on the autism spectrum disorder in my case, and that's how I was able to function even now in my 30s. It all started on a Tuesday in 1983 when an X and Y gave birth to me, and I don't know them for heck because I was adopted at age in 4 days. I was, which is continuously on my mind, but I don't make a big deal about X and Y. I might have their DNA, but they have nothing to do with my life. But it does. So my situation, I've actually learned through doing and trying. And that's something else that I wanted to point out. Trying means doing. And I tend to do things, and it's through doing that I'm able to learn it's okay to fail, just as long as you do something. It was a mindset of hard work, much like Daniel's situation, was somebody who's ethical and loyal and kind and helpful. I'm reciting the Boy Scout oath, which I was for 7 years. It was the only time I quit after 7 years, and that's something else that's important. Do not quit. Too often I see parents who suffocate their kids, who prevent them from learning, prevent them from doing, and it's a travesty. My parents always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted to do, no matter if it was golfing, dentistry, because my dad's a dentist, that's a different story, but I'm trying to say, and I also had the support of my extended family. Although 3 of them in 4 years died around the same time, I still have one who's 89 years old and hard and strong, and although she doesn't remember things as much as she did when she was younger, she was always there whenever I needed help. It's good to have extended family. So I encourage grandparents and uncles and aunts to do whatever they can to help support, and don't leave the burden up to your parents. I also have a younger sister named Chelsea who is neurotypical, meaning she doesn't have autism, and she went to Lebanon Valley College, the school where I went to, and I encouraged her to get a special ed degree. She met her husband there. She has 2 daughters, and she is a true example of how family can work to help each other, because I help her whenever I can. I may not do the diapers or anything like that, but I'm always there to help them out. I may never be a father, but the art of uncling is very important. And I also learned, I know that in today they had cellular phones and things like that, but when I was growing up, they didn't exist. I actually grew up in the 90s, although I was, and I remember when I was a youngster, I was watching Sesame Street and all that. In my teens, I was watching like Rugrats, and then the 20-year-olds, I was watching some teenage things. In 30s, I'm watching inspirational stories. Just to show you that it's okay to do your own thing and to watch whatever shows you want to watch. And it's finally took me now to understand the rules of football and sports, and I still like to go to hockey games and stuff like that. But it's important for people on the autism spectrum to socialize, and I learned that through trial and error, that it works best to talk to people who are different with you, because the truth is that I succeeded not because I was in a shell. I succeeded because I worked with other people. Like, for example, in 2nd grade, my Jewish teacher told me, "You are smart, you do not deserve to be in the CIAU." When I was in 3rd grade, my teacher, Mrs. Koch, who's now the second superintendent of Middletown, Mrs. Susky, was my teacher, and she was a godsend, and she helped me adapt to mainstream life. And she also tutored me during the summer so that I could catch up with all my youngsters. And although I got a D in mathematics in my 3rd grade final, and hence had to take an extra year of remedial math because of a standardized test, which I strongly condemn. The truth is that I succeeded and through hard work, because even though I had to take an extra year of math, it allowed me the preparatory steps to succeed and take the more advanced maths. And by high school, I was learning things like calculus, I was learning organic chemistry, and by doing those higher level courses that are stimulating is part of the reason why I am succeeding. And also at age 16, I also was strongly encouraged, although it was controversial at the time, to get a driver's license. Because if there's one thing that people need is to go from place to place. Although I've been in my share of car accidents and recently ran over by a tire while on the turnpike going to my autism meeting, leading me to miss my it's been an exciting experience driving from place to place. And although I don't encourage it for everybody, but to show you that there is, because driving is like its own skill, and although it didn't exist at the time, the automated cars with bells and whistles, which constantly go off whenever I'm driving, but that's a different story, are a godsend. I know I used to drive a Jeep Cherokee and had more accidents ever since I got the bells and whistles. The only time I was in an accident was when a tire drifted the median and hit my car, causing me to slow down and hit my tail light and then bounced off. Headlights, I mean not tail lights, because it hit the front. But the point I'm trying to make is that there is hope at the end of the tunnel, and my experience, yes, to show you that everything in the long term, if you plan ahead, and things can work out. Even things like minor stuff. Like, for example, when I was a child, I accidentally went into a drugstore and tipped over a line of cans. They shooted me out of the business. 5 years later, went out of business. Apparently, some people were upset that they could treat somebody with dignity, that there was a out of business sale within 5 years. So that tells me something about the business. If they can't treat people with kindness and dignity, they don't deserve to be here. And I would like to inspire people who are familiar with, to get to know them, to encourage diversity. Like, for example, some of my best friends, I worked for a African-American person from South Africa. He was the guy that actually hired me and promoted and encouraged me to go into HIV. Although he left after distress working with the state, I was able to transition into other subjects such as cancer, and I was asked to help with some IRB stuff, institutional review, board in case you're not in the research field. I successfully defended my doctoral study, and that was a hell of a journey. And I mean, I went through 3 chairs and a couple of members. I finally dissolved my committee, changed my major, and the rest is history. I was able to succeed, but for every bump and bruise, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel. Nothing is impossible, only implausible. That's my motto in life.
Up the floor for questions, though I did want to ask one myself before we get started. As a customer serving organization, we offer special programs that are sensory friendly for people who are on the spectrum to come and experience things with a little less chaos. And I'm curious if there are things or recommendations you have that instead of having to do something, completely separate all the time, what are some things that organizations can do to make things a little easier every day for people with autism, instead of having to, maybe all that.
You can go finish.
Well, I love the question because it indicates that there's a desire for people to be together. And we really can't understand each other, whatever our background is or whatever we bring to the table, unless we spend time together. It's all about relationships and being with other people. So any type of an event that can make it possible for everyone to participate is wonderful. And I think that if you're going to do sensory-friendly activities, meaning that while sensory integration problems are not part of the autism diagnostic criteria, believe it or not, it's not, it still tends to be very prevalent among individuals who have this difference that we call autism spectrum disorder. It's a neurologically based disorder, and of course we process sensations through our nervous system, our hearing, our vision. So there are some interruptions there. So my take on that would be is to make it so that everyone can participate, meaning that you're taking these sensitivities into consideration, and then all of the others will also be able to participate because there won't be anything that's inhibiting them from participating. And then marketing it for everybody. And I'll tell you, I would take it a step further. I would say we are child-friendly, period. We are child-friendly.
And adults.
And adults. We are child and adult friendly, and this is what we mean by that. And that's where you define how you've made accommodations for all children and adults, rather than we're going to change things for this population. The whole point of ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, was catching up with what we should have been doing from the very beginning. We were denying access to many things for an entire portion of our population by the way we designed things from the very beginning. We didn't have curb cuts, we didn't have ramps. So from the very beginning, we were cutting out 17% of the population. So by just thinking about the entire population and saying this is child and adult friendly, it's going to go further than just enjoying each other and learning about each other, but it's also going to begin to break down the barriers of the us and the thems, and the them and the others. And because those are all false, man-made classifications, because we just are who we are. There. Probably more than you wanted.
I agree with everything she said. And my take is very similar to that. My mentor, that South African, said reasonable accommodation should be given to everybody no matter what. That was it. And that and his other saying was, nobody died, it's okay if things don't succeed, but just as long as you try. That are two words that I could say are beneficial in keeping me in perspective. And also I wanted to point out that many autistics have secondary conditions that are unrelated to autism. Like, for example, when I was in my 20s, I noticed some rectal bleeding in my thing, and I went to the doctor. I had proctocolitis, so I encourage people, if they have any mental or physical, to take into account the physical difficulties and the other not so common comorbidities.
Thank you. So, do we have any questions from the audience?
I read a few years ago, and it was about the time that we started here, about little signs that are in shops and places of business, and it kind of, everybody's welcome here, but it has to go a step further. There are communities that say this to the senior citizens with whom I work a lot, but that they're going to be dementia friendly. But there's more than that. It's all these things that are different. And I am turning to Lynn to say, how could we do that in Hershey? How could we somehow reach out to the businesses that churches, everything that says, give them a little education, a little more education. Hearing you talk tonight opens up this other spectrum that I want to reach out to people that are different. So
Find the
how can I-
similarities in life, because people focus so many times on the differences. I tend to find the similarities, and if you can find one person with a similar thing, then you have something to discuss, and that's a step forward. So that's my word of advice, is to find the similarities, no matter where and how difficult it's to find. No matter if they're dementia, they still deserve to find the similarities.
I agree with that, everything he said. I would think that it really begins with the desire. It's just recognizing that maybe as we get older, the signs of getting older and more mature is recognizing how little we know and having some humility about there are things that happen in the world that we really don't know because we've not experienced them before. And to take kind of a second to step back and appraise rather than judging. And I'll tell you why this is important, because autism is predominantly a social disability. Social mores, skills, the things that we do socially, they are an agreed upon set of rules. Whether you know it or not, at some point in your life, your parents and your grandparents or your teachers or you agreed, almost secretly, honestly, to this set of rules. And we hold tight to those rules. We hold so tight that if you don't adhere to the social rule, we'll just about do anything to make you either adhere or we throw you out. I mean, they're really strong. So if people can get a sense, just examine yourself on how tightly you hold to these rules. And they have a place. Culture and rules have value. They help us get along. So I'm not saying they're not valuable and they're not important, but to realize that there are whole groups of people, whether they have a different culture or they have autism and they are not able to see, learn, or maybe understand social mores of their own culture, so that some of the behavior that looks so different and it's so unacceptable doesn't enrage us and keep us from connecting. You have to step back and think, what are these rules that are being broken? And why am I responding like I am? I've seen teachers, I'm a teacher, I have seen veteran educators who were marvelous about lose their mind when they didn't understand that the child had a disability that prevented them from doing certain social things. And once they understood, they were able to take a deep breath and relax and say, oh, I get it now, finally, I get it. But I mean, it about drove them crazy. And as the school psychologist trying to support them, trying to support the child, trying to support the parents, it was so clear to me. I'm like, you're going crazy because you're so committed to your social mores, which we need to be. But we have to recognize that there are people with differences. So I would think if a business wanted to be friendly to all different types of people, you have to be very careful not to make a judgment too quickly. When somebody looks different, they sound different, they act different, you have to, even when you get in shock, sometimes I've had someone say something to me that was like so rude, and I go, and then take a deep breath and think, they didn't mean anything by it at all. They just kind of missed that lesson. But there's another day, and we'll work on it.
That's why I say trial and error is the best way to work.
But the punishment can't be too severe, right?
Right.
If you make a mistake.
And I conform when I have to, but then I try to use the conforming to better the environment.
Dr. Geyer, I was wondering, along those lines of the social mores, what do you bump up against most commonly, and how can we learn to be more effective interacting socially?
There's a ton of things that drive me crazy. One of them is the constant eye contact. I don't like staring at people, so why should I have to stare? So I stare as much as I can, and then I try to do something else to make them seem like I'm not staring. That's the way I see it, to conform and then adapt. And another thing that bothers me is just this thing saying, you're wrong. My dad tends to do that a lot. Nate, you're wrong. How am I wrong? I finally came to the realization that he may think I'm wrong, but I'm right. But who is there to judge what is right and wrong? Who is there to... I remember a ton of stories that, well, one of them was to show about the issue, you never call the principal by his first name. I made that mistake and I got detention. That was the only time I got detention. You never talk about the Holocaust in front of a Jew. I learned that by mistake, but the point I'm trying to make is I'm very pro-Semitic towards Jews. I'm not. But it's a learning process, and nothing's ever perfect. And you may not know the rules 100% of the time, but if you can do it 99.9%, you still know the rules. Does that answer your question? Do you have anything?
It would seem that the autism spectrum is ripe for exploitation by unscrupulous segments of society, both exploitation of people with autism, but also exploiting the establishment feigning autism. So what practical guidelines can you give us to identify those sorts of situations?
Excellent question. I'm using that example of when I made fun of gave the principal the first name and the Jewish reference I referenced before that I don't like to talk about, to show that I was actually being bullied at the time. I was bullied by this Jewish person who was a good friend of mine that suddenly went with the wrong crowd and such. And I had to defend myself, and rather than fight them or cause mischief, I actually used my words against them, made fun of the bully. Sometimes in order to, and then he got the message and he stopped bullying everybody. The point I'm trying to make is that you have gifts, use them. There was another word of advice that I remember from my Boy Scout: use your resources. If you're nonverbal, do whatever you can to do the right thing. It may not be what's culturally acceptable, but it's still the right thing.
I would add to that I think it really comes back to the integrity of the medical and psychiatric psychological field for diagnosing autism. I mean, it's something that while people have it, it's not something you would want someone to have necessarily, because it means a harder life. So I think in that regard, there just has to be integrity in the diagnostic world. It is a disability that there's a lot of subjectivity. It's not like blindness, deafness, physical challenges that are measurable and observable. It's a non-observable disability. I mean, it's observable, but it's not totally invisible, but it can be a little invisible. And all of the invisible disabilities, specific learning disabilities, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, neurological impairment, other health impairment, all of these invisible, I'm using that term loosely, disabilities are there is some subjectivity, and within the professional organizations and working with parents and working with schools, we have to just really police each other very carefully not to allow that to happen, because we would want, in this nation, we identify we call things disabilities.
Yes,
It's
and I
kind of
despise that
man-made.
word because it literally means not abled, and I don't consider myself to be not able for anything.
Exactly. And so we made a decision as a society that the way that we will distribute resources is by having people meet certain thresholds. I'm of the belief that we give everyone what they need when they need it. And that's why I said we have a child-friendly event. Why can't everyone be given what they need when they need it? But there are limited resources, so we have decided as a group, as a society, that we're going to have certain criteria in order to delegate these resources. And so I guess we all have to be really careful about that, making sure that the resources are going to the most, needy. But I'll tell you right now, the resources aren't good. So they're not gaming the system that much, because they're really just not that good. So,
Yes, I agree. There's also another problem. There's another side of the coin, and there's the services that they do available are governmental assistance. As somebody who queried the Medicaid database and know that it's a freely accessed database that anybody with administration could query, and it's not personally identifiable as you would want. That was one main reason why I should never be on Medicaid. The other one is that there's a poverty threshold that keep people in poverty unnecessarily and hence not able to do what they're supposed to be doing. Stuck in poverty should never be a goal for anybody. It should never. So why have people in poverty unnecessarily?
I hope you accept this question in the vein in which it's asked, but have you ever watched The Good Doctor?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just curious as to what your perception is of how he portrays an autistic person.
It's over-dramatized. But it's truthful. Any other questions?
Her question made me think of something else, but I do have a second question.
Take your time.
As far as the good doctor, my grandson is borderline autistic, Asperger's. His mother contends that they should actually have an autistic actor play the part. That's how she feels. I just wanted to point that out. The other question is, if you don't mind me asking, going back to Dave, the story of David, you said if he had the correct placement, he would be probably fine by now. How do you find that correct placement? What could my grandson do to get there?
That's a good question.
it's a great question. It is very difficult because there really is a shortage of people that, I call it thinking in autism. It's looking at a situation and appraising it and seeing it from the perspective of the person that may have those challenges, and then being able to make a change. I think it's probably finding someone that's worked in the field for a long time, that understands.
Finding a mentor, I agree.
Yeah, a mentor, someone in the field that knows what they're doing. And unfortunately, I don't know if it's fortunately, but parents and grandparents need to educate themselves as well. You need to advocate for your child and all of the other children. So advocating that work is possible, it's needed.
And there's also needs to be self-advocacy.
Yes. The research says that kiddos coming out of high school and going into higher ed or going into work that can advocate for themselves. They know the nature of their difficulties, they know their strengths, they know what they need. If they can articulate that, they're much, much more likely to be successful. And if they can't, they will fail. That's how strong they have. And that involves working with someone other than the parent. The parent this is the typical part of development for someone with autism. There are a lot of areas, but this is one, is the parent's not the therapist. You know, the parent's not the counselor, and some kids will book. I mean, I want them to book it because that's normal. Not that you don't want your parent to be a confidant or to provide you with some guidance, but if you had teenagers or young adults, you know that there comes a developmental phase in life where you don't know anything.
That is correct. And I would like to add another story that I ran out of time to say. When I was in college, I was really the first time I went to advocacy. I advocated myself in a couple of situations. First of all, I went to school and graduated in 2001, and then I started school that fall, and then guess what happened? 9/11. Complete shock to everybody. And because there I had to grow up because although I lived at home because I drove, I did have to think for myself on how to get aware of what was going on in that tragic day. And it got me into thinking if nobody was going to, if I was thinking to myself, what would happen to my grandparents who lived in Long Island at the time, New York, were involved in that tragic day? I would be heartbroken. And it's a true story that I had to think for myself and advocate for myself and be the best person I could be in order to support those grandparents and parents who were. And there is a time around college that people should advocate for themselves. And I appreciate grandparents and parents who support them, but it's a growing process. That's the reason why I've seen the other side of the coin. The parents who don't want to give up control, who suffocate their kids. It never ends well, because what would happen if they're gone? There's no one there to do that. And that was a true wake-up call that I had to think for myself and advocate for myself.
Can I tell you a story? He now works at Wise Markets down in Philadelphia. So they have him selling beer, okay? And he's fine with that, he does a great job. But the people that come in and have to give their driver's license, he has to do it. He has to card his own mother, right? So anyway, this one woman came in and really gave him a hard time, and he said, "Would you like to see the manager?" He was being very proper about it. And she said, "Yes, I would." And she was going on, and finally he said, "Well, lady, I guess you better go to Giant and get your beer then." Anyway, he just had enough.
Ironically, that was my first job. I worked at the bakery, and I actually was doing what they call the dungeon, and pulling out the bagels, pulling out the things at night. And a few times I did interact with customers because I have the worst handwriting, but yet they told me to decorate a cake. Fortunately, I was able to call somebody in the deli and ask them to do that, and they were more than happy. A few times I was stuck by myself, but then I had to think for myself, well, how is best to decorate this cake? Well, nasty to say, it didn't turn out well, but it really got me thinking.
You are a person of unusual capabilities and personality. You're very engaging. I would guess some of us, maybe many of us, came here tonight knowing someone who is autistic, who doesn't have all those resources. that you have. We're told this is going to be difficult to handle, the child's having problems in school. Talk about dinosaurs with them because he's obsessed with dinosaurs. That's the image that we have. And
that's what I had when I was younger.
Okay. Now, here's another question, and I'm not trying to get a consult from you, but I'm the best friend of a person who has severe Asperger's. She's in another part of the world, so I'm not sharing any private things here. But in her work in artificial intelligence, she perhaps can't get, because of some sensory deprivation, the full picture of her interactions with her manager or her colleagues. And so, in the absence of information, this is my question, is there a tendency to become paranoid because there's so much unknown in what your manager really thinks of you, or are your colleagues scorning you or making fun of you, or what's going on? Thank you.
Yes, there is this sense of what you said, and that's why I bring back that 7th grade experience was one of them. Although it turned out better for me, despite getting detention, I did get scorned. I did make a fool out of myself, saying that teddy bear instead of in front of the principal. I didn't know at the time the consequences. It was very impulsive to say that name in front of the principal, who's Ted Giovannis. But it did eventually come to my senses years later, the consequences. And there is this problem with law enforcement. In many of the autistics, they have to deal with law enforcement, and some of them need to be trained on how to handle such crisis situations. Fortunately, my encounters with the law enforcement were all positive, for the most part, except for a few accidents, but that's a different story. But the point I'm trying to make is there has to be better communication with those in charge of helping other people, including managers.
I would say that if I would classify autism as any particular anything, I would say it's a disability of not understanding. And what happens is when you have chronic misunderstanding about what's going on, reading the cues, knowing if someone's doing that, are they teasing me, are they just bantering, are they being playful, are they being cruel, being able to sort through that actually results in a chronic anxiety that can really be debilitating and very painful. And it's not the kind of anxiety we think of with regards to, inherited neurotransmitters, but it's literally a valid response to a pretty crappy situation. So it's an adaptive response. Yes, if you're if you're not understanding what's going on,
that's how I function through
anxious.
trial and error, yes, and that was a crappy situation, but and it made crappier by detention. But the point I'm trying to make is
we're regressing here.
It's not a regression. It is.
Sorry. Well, I was just going to say that it's very difficult to interpret the nuance between whether you're being teased for bantering, for fun's sake, or whether someone's being mean. So it's not paranoia, it's just she just doesn't get it. And there's no one there to interpret it for her. And what she needs is a colleague to come alongside, a mentor, that can help sort out what's really happening and what's not. Because if she's being mistreated, someone needs to deal with it.
And I don't have the mic, but I'll just quickly point out, I'm a trial and error person myself, but when she is talking to her boss about whether he is exploiting her in one way or another, her job's on the line. He might say go somewhere else.
Is there a higher supervisor to talk to?
And I've tried to work on that with her. Okay.
Because generally speaking, if there's an organization, there's a higher up, that is their supervisor, and if somebody could consult that higher supervisor, then that would keep the one in line. That's in fact the approach that I did when I was made fun of at a colleague when I was an unpaid intern at the Department of Health. I was actually being paid by Penn State. Part of my 10 years was working with the DOH, and there was this colleague who was higher up than me. He made fun of me, and eventually managed to cause a coup. But at the time, I reached out to my supervisor, was my mentor, and told him the story. He told me he had some problems with that employee as well, but he sat down and talked to his supervisor, and then it got all sorted out. Years later, when that colleague tried to oust and cause a coup in the DOH, I was not included in that, so I couldn't be implicated for any of that stuff, but I was impacted by that coup because my employer, my mentor, was forced to resign. He actually had health problems, and we actually had to work late nights in order to correct some of those misdeeds, and it got too much. But the point I'm trying to say is that it can be a bad situation, but in the long run, hopefully there's other people to mentor, and to have multiple mentors is key.
Thank you.
I just want to thank you for being here to talk, because isn't that how we come to an understanding of each other, is open communication. And without people like you expressing how you feel, we don't have any idea what that, what that feels like and how to open communication. So I want to thank you for that. From a young child standpoint, I think if we can all be less judgmental, as both of you talked about earlier, to young mothers or fathers in grocery stores who are having a child meltdown because they can't handle the sensory stimulation in the grocery store, and instead of looking at them in judgment that it's a behavior, and it's not a behavior at all, it's a sensory meltdown. So I think as a community, we have a responsibility to interact with parents in a different way than what our human condition typically tells us to. So that's my comment about young children. Then I have a question for you guys about older kiddos. When you talk about them needing to advocate or have an advocate, a mentor for them, for verbal individuals, I can envision how that might work. But for a non-verbal or a minimally verbal individual that's on the spectrum, what kinds of resources might be available for them to access?
I'll be happy. I'll be happy to get this done. I'll be happy to speak to that. I think I will. Can I see it? It's okay. Turn it off. There. Is that better?
Can you? Yeah, it works.
Are you sure?
Got it.
Sorry, I couldn't keep to myself.
We're friends. We go back a long way. Let me get my thoughts. Well, what I would encourage in any situation is if a student, nonverbal does not mean not thinking. It doesn't mean not feeling. It doesn't mean all of these things that we think it means. It just means not talking. And there are other ways to communicate. We use multiple ways to communicate every day. We use our eye contact, we use our facial expressions, our gestures, our body language, our intonation, we use our pitch, we use our loudness, we use words. Okay, so words are just one part of the way we communicate. So I think that however that child is learning to communicate, whether it's with an iPad or whether it's using some sign or whether it's pointing, that the team working with that child need to begin to work with them about how they're feeling about things and what their opinions are and what their desires are and how they can make requests and how they can have an opinion and how their opinion matters. Because not being nonverbal also doesn't mean not hearing. I mean, I would say the predominant number of nonverbal people actually understand everything you're saying. And as a psychologist, I can tell. I'll walk in and I'll just see how the child that may not be talking, how they respond, and they're like this. They've got their ear up, and I'm like, oh my goodness, you understand
Use your
everything that's being
resources.
said? Yes, use your resources. But I would work in the same direction as much as you possibly can in helping young people to express themselves in however way they want to do that. Even if it's through art or through their interests or through their hobbies, there are lots of ways to communicate.
Hi, my name's Thomas Hassel. I'm with the Greater Harrisburg Autism Society, and I'm also the leader of an adult autism support group in the Greater Harrisburg area. And to answer your question about being an advocate, your daughter can also use some of these are electronic boards that she can type in words and a voice will come out for her. Because if she can write, she can also write letters or whatever, or use a computer.
Tom is a good friend of mine who I invited. He is a adult on the autism spectrum who spoke to the CIAU building a few weeks ago. He had his share of struggles, and he's now a board member at the Autism Society of Harrisburg and the co-leader of, actually leader because I stepped down because I had to do other things. But he's a good friend of mine.
I actually had a question having to deal with hiring. So I guess I can ask you as far as interview processes.
It's a pain.
Oh, yeah, I guess I wanted to say, were you, when you were initially hired for positions, were you ever hired for the position you wanted to? Because I know you talked about the one position that you weren't necessarily fond of right away, or did some of the typical social norms in interviews ever cause some concerns, and what can we do about that?
There was a trouble, because the first job that I got at Weiss Market, I had a job coach. The second time I worked at Hershey Medical Center, I in fact had a job coach who approached Hamilton Health Center, who approached Dr. Matabi, my mentor, and he talked to the graduate program who I actually got my master's, and that's how I got the job, through word of mouth. When I got my doctorate, I wanted to get I wanted to get myself into more doctoral level things, and I had to fill out applications. I had one interview after 15 applications, and I didn't get the job. So to say that, for some reason, when you get the doctorate, the mindset is that you get a postdoc or faculty, but there is a lot of doctorates, and I'm included, who don't have either. And I am underemployed not because is a word that defines that the job you have now is not the job that you want, in my mind. And there is a burden for candidates to read the lengthy job description, and a computer or something like that decides whether or not you meet the minimum criteria, and then human resources filters it out, and then the candidates that they decide are the candidates that are generally interviewed, and then by then they already made their decision. And then whether or not, based on all these factors, hiring, so it's a hellhole to get a job, at least with a doctorate. But I can imagine, I know Tom over there who spoke, had 100 job interviews and didn't get a single job after working at Kmart or wherever he worked at.
I was going to say, one of the inhibitors are phone interviews. I think that I've known adults to be able, or even teenagers, to be able to do pretty well on the first level of the paper part.
Yes.
And then they get to the phone interview. Because autism, one of the characteristics, because I do diagnostic testing every week, is the cadence of speech, volume control, syncopation, so that when you're talking on the phone and somebody's speech patterns sound different, that's a red flag to, oops, something's not right here.
And I got my doctorate degree online, so I know about phone interviews.
Yeah, and so I would say, don't make decisions on content rather than perception. I know a young woman who has multiple master's degrees. She has cerebral palsy, and her speech is breathy. And because it's breathy, she can't get past the phone interviews. And I know that's why. She's a wonderful worker and would be a great employee, but she can't get past the phone interview because there's just a different pattern, cadence, volume control in the actual speech. So I recommend that adults that are interviewing turn down the volume on your phone first if you have a volume control problem. But
As
that's
somebody
not
who
enough.
has an in-person interview, it also helps to have a person who helps with interviews, like a job coach, do the practice interview before you actually do the interview. Unfortunately, when I got my doctorate, I didn't get a job coach because I didn't feel I needed it. I didn't get the necessary practice. And also many schools have career centers that help with practice interviews. In my case, they probably didn't think I was qualified for a doctoral level position, but I did do a bunch of practice phone interviews with career services.
I think we have time for one more question, and then, because we're running a little bit over, if you two can hang out for a few minutes, if anyone that didn't get a chance can ask.
Hi, my name's Sabrina, and I am a psychiatric nurse, and I'm a manager, and I work with children and adolescents. I'm also from this community, and I think that this conversation, there's so many great things that have been going on here. And just as a small community, I think Hershey has a lot to be able to start having these diversity conversations. We're talking and focusing on autism spectrum, but a lot of what we're saying applies to really anybody else in this community. As a mother, too, my child is a normal kid. He has meltdowns. Just being the respect and the empathy towards each other. And I think that this is just a really great forum for people to start talking and a little bubble of a community to start building these things. And as a young person, well, I'm not that young, but younger, just there's a lot of societal changes and social norms that are changing, and it's going to be a multi-generational change in our community here. So, thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. And something else I wanted to say, there's this misconception that people with autism have no empathy. It's reduced. But they do have compassion. I've met many autism spectrum disorder people who are the most compassionate people I've ever met. May not be able to put their shoes in other people's thing, but that doesn't mean they don't have compassion. If it is for that reason, I encourage you to approach an autism person with compassion, not so much having eye contact, not so much no empathy, but just do it with compassion.
Thank you so much, both of you.